Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids, and Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. Omari, my guy, we're going to spare the listeners another week of us arguing over movies, music, and pop culture in general because we have a celebration. Happy birthday. A little bit late, but on Friday for Omari Sankofa II.
Thank you. Appreciate the birthday wishes. I'm 28, so I'm in that age range where it's like I'm not sure if I'm as excited for these as I was when I was a little bit younger. But no, it was fun. No, I had a great. I celebrated with some friends Saturday night, and actually celebrated my birthday in Chicago as well because it was Friday, and feels great. All my hair is still black. We're all good. We're all in the clear. So
yeah, I'm starting to get a little bit of that gray in my beard. I know, nobody can see me, but I'm bald, but I got the beard going, but there's a little gray getting in there. But Omari, man, we got a great guest today. My friend, Richard Stayman. His Twitter is @MavsDraft, a must follow. It's not just Maverick stuff. It's all NBA draft stuff. The best there is. MavsDraft.com is his website. He's a co-host on Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Richard, welcome to the Pistons Pulse. And before we get going, Omari brought up being in Chicago. We got to ask you the most important question of the podcast: Detroit-style pizza or Chicago-style pizza?
I feel like I'm about to give the wrong answer no matter what I say. And I'm going to offend everybody. I don't think I've ever had Detroit-style pizza.
Ooh. Even I've had Detroit-style. I know what Wes's answer is because Wes is actually from Chicago. And Omari, you had a tweet this weekend that kind of sent Pistons Twitter in a little bit of a frenzy.
Whenever I'm in Chicago, I always tweet a photo of Detroit-style pizza Chicago-style pizza because it's just like it's like a bomb. It's like a firecracker. You do it and immediately everybody's gonna either agree or disagree. So I was just like, TL's a little boring right now. Let me put the Chicago-style pizza in here. Have some controversy to the TL.
All right, let's get into this. The prospects at number 5 for the Detroit Pistons. We're going to start with Jaden Ivey, Richard. Just give the listeners, anybody can fit with Cade Cunningham. The biggest question about Jaden Ivey then is, how does he fit? Does his game complement a player like Cade Cunningham who's going to have the ball in his hands? Can Jaden Ivey play off the ball? Let's start there and then work down.
Yeah, I think he can play off the ball. You look at, he loved shooting threes this year, and I think most of them were probably self-created. And I think with a little bit of, spot-up shooting and having somebody else do some of those dirty work and save him some of his legs, I think you'll be able to see spot-up shooting be a part of his arsenal. I don't know how much of his bag is, or I should say skill set comes from shooting, but I think it's definitely in there.
His shooting fell off toward the end of the year. I think he started off around 43 or 44, and then last 15 games, I dug down to 25. I guess my thing with Ivey in general, top-tier athlete, it's just rounding out the rest of his game. It's a shooting consistent. You feel good about him as the guy who can move the ball. For you, I guess, as you see Ivey progress, is he an on-ball primary point guard type to you, or do you think he's probably more in that Donovan Mitchell? You still want maybe a guy like Cade next to him?
Yeah, I think ultimately you don't want Ivey to be your alpha ball handler, but I go back and forth on this because I don't know if Ivey can handle not being the alpha ball handler. Like some of the intel I've gotten is just that on the FIBA team, that was not exactly the most ideal role, with Ivey wanting getting the ball in his hands a lot, and that it caused some trouble. And then at Purdue, who else was going to take the ball from him? So he was able to do that. I think he can fit with the Cade Cunningham. It's just going to take some growing pains of establishing what the hierarchy of roles and responsibilities are.
So you brought that up, and you and I, we talk a little bit, and I know you have a little bit of intel and stuff, but have you heard any intel on Jaden Ivey and just his demeanor, his attitude, I guess, a little bit? Because there's been some body language questions, just people watching the film. Even whenever I watch the film, you could see his teammates getting after him at times about his defense, which is something I'm sure Omari or I will ask you about. But have you heard any of those type of things, just like the general attitude, being a good teammate type stuff?
Haven't heard a ton outside of kind of just an extension from what I just said, where it may be I don't know if it's a me first kind of mentality or what. The last thing I would want, and I don't want to put words into and twist things, but I don't know if he's like Carmelo Anthony, where those stories of Carmelo would score 20 points and the Nuggets won and he was pissed. He would he would score 50 and they lost, and he was like the happiest person on the plane. So I don't know if he's quite like that, but that's just something I think really the only personality trait I know of is just he wants the ball. I don't think he wants to be in a low usage role. That's as much intel as I got on that front.
For you, how comfortable do you feel that Ivey will round out those other parts of his game? Because he really showcased more of his full package, I thought, last season. But how confident are you that he will eventually become, or that three-point shooting is sustainable and that he will improve those other areas that aren't relying on his athleticism?
I think you just look at the range he shot from really impacted that 3-point percentage, and he still shot 36%, 74% from the line. Not like those aren't exactly blowing you away, those numbers, but they're also pretty strong and repeatable and, projectable overall towards the NBA. He has weird form. It's a low release. It's a flat, really just a set shot, I should say. So I kind of worry about that being at his size, and he's also super skinny, but as a shooter, I do think that it is very possible for him to grow, especially because he won't have any trouble adjusting to the NBA distance from three.
What about the other end of the court, Richard? Because, there's a guy like Paolo Banchero who we don't get to talk about anymore now that the Pistons have fallen to 5. But, there was a huge knock on his defense. And then when I went to watch the film, I didn't think it was as bad as what people were bringing it up. Is Jaden Ivey the same thing? Because, a lot of people including myself, want the Pistons to put a backcourt mate with Cade Cunningham, who's going to be able to guard the other team's primary perimeter offensive player. Is that something, maybe not in year one, but you think Jaden Ivey can do? I know the physical tools are there, but do you think that's the kind of mentality he can have, the attention to detail, the focus on that end of the court?
Yeah, I think in theory he has the tools to do it. The recovery ability and motor, for the most part, I know we talked about just a second ago, sometimes he did take plays off, but when he's fully engaged, his recovery ability, that combo just of trying hard and an ability to never be taken out of the play, I think it's passable. He needs to add strength. I think it's honestly more of an issue than, consistency every play. For me, I think you look at just the foot speed, recovery ability, and I think he's got good instincts too. He knows where to be. He's not really lost on rotations and things like that. In theory, I think he could be a good defender. My guess is at Purdue, a lot of the reason he wasn't that good of a defender consistently is because when you're doing everything on offense the next play, it's going to be hard.
Opinion is split on Ivey a little bit if he belongs in that top tier of the draft, along with Banchero, Smith, and Holmgren. For you, do you see him as that level of prospect, or is he probably just a little bit under?
Yeah, he's almost in that in-between, but at the same time, you look at guards that are like him with the explosive, skinny frame, somewhat of a jump shot. We're seeing one who just won Most Improved Player kind of fit that bill. So it's hard to bet against that, and I do think that ultimately he has the most strengths on my scouting report, and that has to mean something. I don't know if maybe the flaws really outweigh all of those strengths, but he has the most strengths of any player I built out in a scouting report, and to me that does matter. I think he could be the number one player in this draft. There's a real world where that does happen. Just how likely is it? And for me, when you look at guys who are all 6'10 and above and can all score at a high level, and for the most part, all three of the other guys, Banchero, Chet, and Jabari, they're all able to shoot and score at a pretty good level while also playing very good defense. It's hard with Jaden Ivey just being a guard to compare those kind of circumstances. So in some ways, I could see him being 2 or 3, and in other circumstances like mine, I have him number 4.
So you talked about all those strengths. So I want to just ask this point blank. What has to happen for Jaden Ivey to hit his ceiling? Because you just talked about there's a chance he could end up maybe being the best player in this draft class. So if that is his ceiling, what goes right? What has to improve? What has to happen? Is it about being in the right system? Is there a specific development pattern that he needs to follow? How does he hit his ceiling?
Yeah, I think it really starts with that 3-point shooting, right? Like I said, 36% this last year, decent free throw percentage. So the free throw percentage generally is a better indicator than actual 3-point percentage. I think it really just comes down to 3-point shooting. Can he be league average? I think he's pretty good because he'll get to the rim and finish at the rim at a high level. Also doesn't take any mid-range jump shots. On the year he took it wasn't much. It was a small number. It was under 50. Wasn't a lot of mid-range shots. So 1.5 a game. Who knows what the shooting really looks like? And then also if the defensive motor issues or the consistency, if that doesn't scale up and those get curbed, I think he's going to be a very good player.
Let's move on to Shaedon Sharpe, another guy that I think the Pistons are pretty high on and would be happy if he's there at 5. He's a little bit of a man of mystery, obviously enrolled at Kentucky, but didn't play. Some of what I was hearing in Chicago, it just depends on the team. I don't think the Pistons are as concerned about him not playing in college. If a guy can play, a guy can play. For you, just what kind of sticks out about Shaedon Sharpe in general and what puts him in this tier where he's seen pretty widely as a top 6 pick at this point?
You look at a guy who he's measured at 6'6", 7-foot wingspan, elite athlete, can score at all 3 levels, and can separate and create for himself a little bit. I think when you look at that raw skill set is the best player in the country. Kind of skill set. There's a reason he was the number 1 recruit before reclassifying. And when you look at that frame for a wing or a shooting guard, that's just what you want. You have the length to cover on defense, to also finish at the rim. He can score at any level, and he might be able to pass too. So it also helps that he's like that raw upside guy, but that's really the sell on him. The raw tools are elite.
So real quick here, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Richard, but can you give our listeners just a little bit of the path that Sharpe went down to end up at this point? Because I know it's been a little bit confusing to me. Like, he reclassified. Was he going to be eligible for the draft? He wasn't going to be eligible for the draft. The date on his grad diploma, I don't know what it was. He went to Kentucky, but he didn't play at Kentucky. Can you just give our listeners a little bit of background so maybe they understand whenever people say he hasn't played basketball in over a year, why that is and what the journey was?
Yeah. So after his junior season, around to the end of it, he started exploding in these circuits and the EYBL, all this stuff, and all these high school games. He just rose up the boards big time on recruiting. He was like, I don't know if he was top 100 after sophomore. And then he kept playing better and better and better. And eventually he became the number 1 prospect. He killed it last summer and he exploded. After that, there was buzz. Hey, he's old enough. He might be able to reclassify. Then there were some rumors about how legitimate his reclassification is, but it got approved. Even though, because people said, hey, we expect him to graduate in November and you have to graduate like before, I think it was like the start of the fall semester or something. So things didn't add up one way or another. He got to graduate. He gets to Kentucky. As he's there, he's warming up with the team. All these scouts are there to watch him. And he says, hey, or I guess through like Draft Express, they say he's going to see the first 2 to 3 games. If he doesn't play after this, he's not coming back. There's always the option, but he's going to get good feedback and he's expecting that. Then he's going to stay in the draft. And that's where we are now, is he's gotten great feedback and probably will stay in the draft.
From a skill standpoint, it seems like he's probably more of an off-ball guy compared to Ivey. How do you feel about Sharpe just beyond the athleticism, his shooting, playmaking? What kind of sticks out about him that enables him to be this 5-star top-rate guy?
Yeah, so he does need to be a little bit more consistent from 3 and likes using his right hand too much right now, but he's kind of a classic 18-year-old, right? Where all those raw tools are there, but you're like, all right, come on, use your right hand or split the right hand, left hand usage a little bit more. You go through some cold and hot spells a little bit more than you'd like. The defense, absolutely impossible to tell because high schoolers don't play great defense for the most part, whether it's the top, even, once you're top defensive recruit, you're not playing defense in high school and you're scoring 30 points a game. That's the last thing you want to do. And I get it. What does he actually look like as a defender? He has the tools, again, to be that. As far as jump shot, I being more consistent, but his form is just kind of weird. That's not exactly the smoothest or most fundamental, but he has good touch and the shot goes in enough where it's projectable probably to the next level. I don't think he needs to be an on-ball guy as much as Jaden Ivey personally. I think especially in the first 2 or 3 years, don't let him get a ton of point guard reps if you're trying to win.
How high level of an athlete is he going to be, Richard? Because it's one thing to see the video of the 49-inch vertical that we've all seen, and it would be a record at the combine and all that stuff. But I think all of us here know that that stuff doesn't always then actually translate to the basketball floor. Now, I've also seen the highlight videos of him catching lobs and offensive rebounds and getting blocks. Is he a top 10% athlete in the league? Is he a top 5? Is he a top 1? And is he using that athleticism in a practical way based off the limited amount of film you've been able to watch?
Probably top 10% of that. You look at how he reacts off of cuts. It's lethal. He gets a running start on those cuts. You're not stopping him at the rim. You're ending up on a poster. If you're a big man, his change of direction is really special, I think, too. So beyond just the jumping, you look at how he can move really well. Has a good first step, things like that. The one area with athleticism that he hasn't blown me away in is he never really created a ton of space on drives. Like you see Jaden Ivey, he gets a man on his hip. He doesn't stay on his hip for a while because he's in the rearview mirror. Can't say the same about Sharpe, but the counter with that is like, look, he has 7-foot wingspan. So like, yes, his man is on his hip, but he's probably not blocking if he's doing an extension layup. So the athleticism, I think it is pretty translatable to in game. When it's translatable and beyond just cuts, I don't know though. But right now it's just cuts is going to be when you see it used.
On paper, it seems like Sharpe is pretty close to everything you would want in a backcourt partner with Cade. Just the athleticism, his upside as a shooter. He's a lob threat. Could push the pace in transition. He's a great transition threat because of his athleticism. Do you agree with that? That Sharpe Cade backcourt could really be something special if Sharpe turns out the way he could turn out given his skill set?
Yeah, I think if you look at the best backcourt upsides in the league, that might be number one. Because Cade Cunningham, to me, I think he's still a superstar like I projected last year. And Shaedon Sharpe has a really good chance to do that too. He has the highest ceiling in the draft, I think even higher than Chet Holmgren. And honestly, if he was in last year's class, he'd probably have a top 3 ceiling too. So you're looking at a guy who's just incredibly gifted in terms of raw talent. And if the Pistons say they do get him, they were to be able to develop him into more than just a raw talent and a useful basketball player beyond that, that's a future All-Star.
So I want to follow up that question and answer with this question, because I know Pistons fans are going to get excited about that answer that you had. What do you expect in year one? Because we all get impatient as fans, and it's like, Richard came on the Pistons Pulse and said that Shaedon Sharpe, Cade Cunningham could be, the best backcourt in the league, but that's not going to happen year one. Would he have the least amount of production year one in the NBA of any of these top 5, 6, 7 guys, as we continue to talk about him?
I don't think he's going to be in the running for like rookie of the year, right? I think you're looking at a guy who most of his offense comes in the way of transition in like 10 seconds or less scoring. And also, I don't know how much I see him really creating from the perimeter into drives. Like those kind of things are going to be very, very rare. I think you look at just transition scoring is how he's going to get most of his points. He might get some assists, but generally quick offense coming off of turnovers, whatever it is, that's probably where you're going to see the most impact from Sharpe. I personally would not get a ton of hope for him this year. You might see some flashes, of other things in between, but ultimately transition is where a majority of his scoring and playmaking will come from this year.
And then who are you higher on as a prospect between Ivey and Sharpe?
I like Ivey, but it's really close. I think if you're looking at just the ceilings, Sharpe blows him away. But if you're looking at the combination of floor, ceiling, and likelihood and everything like that, Jaden Ivey takes the cake.
I want to ask one more question about Shaedon Sharpe before we move on to a couple other prospects. What is the scenario where it just goes terribly wrong for him, Richard? Like, what is the possibility? Is there anything you've seen in his game where you're like, man, this makes me a little nervous as an evaluator because we may be overlooking this, or we may be projecting this too much, or this situation for him isn't going to be good? Any one of those things, anything you can see right now where like, man, maybe this could go wrong? Yeah.
So there's 3 things. Jump shooting, like I said, weird form. Not really sure how to project that because I also don't know what his stats were all along, because we have some stats, but it's really small sample size. The lack of blow-by ability where he doesn't break away from his man despite being explosive. And then we don't know what his defense is. He could be an absolute traffic cone on defense. And if you're a mediocre offensive player, if he hits an average outcome and his defense just sucks, then what does he do on the floor? Is he a very good player? Hard to say.
All right, guys, we're going to go to a short break here, but when we come back, we're going to talk about a couple other prospects in this range that the Pistons like in Benedict Mathurin and Keegan Murray.
I'm Alyssa Robinson for the Detroit Free Press. When you wake up every morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your email? Me too. And when you sign up for our daily briefing newsletter, you'll get all the latest news sent directly to your inbox so you can wake up and be ready for the day. We also have newsletters about COVID-19 in Michigan, the latest entertainment headlines, as well as Woodward 248, a newsletter specifically for people living and working in Southeast Oakland County. And don't forget about automotive headlines and all the latest news from our Michigan sports teams. We have a newsletter for every personality and preference. Just head to freep.com/newsletters to sign up for any one of these great options and more.
We're back here with Richard Stayman to talk about these next two prospects that I believe are pretty high on Detroit's draft board, and Benedict Mathurin and Keegan Murray. Let's open up with Keegan Murray. I think he's a little divisive for fans because you have two guys in Ivey and Sharpe who are super athletic, high upside guys, and then Keegan, he'll be 22 when he's a rookie. Super productive last season, but for some people, they see that as having less upside. For you, I guess, where do you fall on the upside debate with a guy like Murray, who was extremely, extremely productive last year? There's a few question marks about what he could do, but some may say he doesn't quite have that star ceiling.
Yeah, I think he has a lot more room to grow than people are giving him credit for. He hasn't learned, I guess, how to hit movement threes, which could be big. You look at his off-ball play. If he could be a good off-ball player, I think that actually raises his ceiling a lot. Because, some of the plays won't translate, like those quick offensive post-ups and stuff against like smaller forwards. They're not going to do that in the NBA. The most times he's going to post up is if he gets a point guard, probably in transition. And a lot of his scoring does come from transition. But I think when you look at his ability to develop as a half-court scorer and turning transition offense into, quick scoring opportunities, like under 15 seconds or something like that, and then starting to create from that time frame, I think that's a big area of growth for him. I really do think his upside it's kind of weird. A lot of guys who think of upside being like, all right, he scored 13 points a game in college. Can he score 20 in the NBA? Whereas Keegan Murray, his upside is really just based on the expectation. Nobody expects him to repeat his college performance. If he does, that's a really high upside player. So I would say if he can just repeat and translate to the NBA, that's actually a pretty good upside too.
So let's just stay with the upside. What has to hit? And I know you talked a little bit about it, but what has to absolutely hit for him to hit that upside? Is it the shooting, half-court creation? Is it developing more of a post game? Because I know like one of the critiques, and even for me, is he got a lot of buckets in the post in college. I don't know that the way he got them translates to the NBA, but that doesn't mean he can't find other ways to get those same type of buckets.
For me, it comes down to two things. One, again, those movement threes, just being able to come off screens and pop really quickly without having to do the full motion in terms of just squaring up, getting your angle that you're used to, but adjusting different angles from threes. And then also, if he could shake that tweener label, he's been seen as like, and most guys, it's not a thing this generation anymore. That's the thing of like Derek Williams of the past and Jan Vetzley, all those like that generation. But you don't really hear that. Usually that's almost a strength, that versatility. But if Keegan Murray can become a versatile player, I think you've got a really good chance to unlock some key upside. And that entails guarding up and down across the lineup, guarding pretty much 2 through 5. And then on offense, being able to create from any level, movement threes, and then also post up, be small ball 5.
You talk about the rim protection or, just what he could bring on defense. He averaged 2 blocks a game. I asked him about his switching last week, and he said he did feel pretty good that he could switch onto smaller players. But he's a little bit of a hefty 6'8". How do you feel about his upside on defense, and if he's a guy that would be better at the perimeter or maybe closer to the rim?
Yeah, so I'm fact-checking myself now, but I'm pretty sure Keegan Murray either had as many games or more games with a block. And actually, I just looked it up. I just fact-checked it. Keegan Murray had more games with a block than Walker Kessler, who was, I want to say he was the number 1 shot blocker in the country. So,
he had like a historic shot blocking season, right? By like the metrics or something.
Granted, almost every game Walker Kessler got a block and it was like 2 blocks. Keegan Murray, most of them were 1. But it's still impressive that every single game, being the focal point on offense, he was still also the best defender on the team. And it resulted in defensive stats. He's a really good help side defender. He can stay in front of guys. There was a possession where he locked up Johnny Davis. You look at his defense, and I think it's about the safest skill, really. I mean, his offense, a lot will translate, but his defense is just remarkable. And when you look at just that ability to play a help side defender, honestly, a blind side defender more than a help side, makes him a really quality power forward that can sometimes be the center in the lineup.
So I want to go back to the offensive side of the floor, because one thing that people seem to really like is his passing. And whenever I did my film breakdown, I thought it was good, but I didn't think it was great. And so I guess I'm asking a couple questions here. One, how much off the dribble stuff you think he's going to be able to develop? Because I'll say it the other way on that. He had a little more wiggle in his game than what I anticipated. Maybe I just went in with low expectations. So how much self-creation, or how much creation with the ball in his hands? That's what I should say. How much creation with the ball in his hands can he do? Like off the dribble, maybe go get a bucket, or off the dribble, attack the defense, get a teammate an open look?
Yeah, I think some of the just drives really from like ISO drives were hidden because of the college spacing. Every time against Keegan Murray, there was a big just camped in the paint because there's no defensive three in college. So that'll help him a lot. But also on the other hand, you look at his catch and shoot versus off the dribble shooting. He had 100 less off the dribble shots than catch and shoot shots. So to me, that's a little bit alarming in terms of can he create his own jump shot? And as a forward, you really need that. I don't think it's like a fatal flaw or anything, but it is a limiter to him. So if you're wanting him to, create at all three levels, I don't know how soon that happens, if at all it happens. I'd honestly worry more about it on the 3-point line than the mid-range. But as a scorer, in terms of driving to the basket, I think you'll be pretty confident in him producing.
Do you think he belongs in that same tier as Sharpe and Ivey just because of how high his floor is, or in general, would you probably lean more toward the upside in that?
I have him one spot behind Sharpe. I'm in a weird, so my tiers, I have, honestly, Shaedon Sharpe's just in his own weird tier. I don't know what to do with him because he's just so unique. But Keegan Murray is my next in line. Look, if you're trying to figure out, all right, who do we draft, like the blend of floor upside, he's probably the best player at 5, honestly. Him or the guy we'll talk about next, Benedict Mathurin. But if you're trying to get the swing for the fences, he's probably not the guy to go for. You're getting a guy who's probably going to peak in terms of development by year 4. By year 4, he'll be 26 years old. So you're probably getting the best version of him in his rookie contract, which is good because by the time he's done with that second contract, in theory, he's 30, he's at his absolute peak, might walk. But I don't know if I would take him at 5. There's something just weird about it. The highest floor, when you're a team that's rebuilding and you're 3 now, you probably want to start aiming for the ceilings and getting a second superstar, especially when you missed in 2020. No offense.
I want to talk just comps, and we won't do this. We obviously didn't do it with Ivy and Sharpe, and I don't know if it's something you like to do, but the one that always came up was Tobias Harris. But then I sent out a tweet this weekend, and I got some Gordon Hayward, which I thought was interesting, and some Chris Middleton, which I really thought was interesting. And so judging by your body language right now, you don't like those. So tell us why you don't like those. And if you have a better comp, give it to us, or maybe just by breaking those ones down, we'll kind of get a better, visual.
Yeah, normally I like to do a floor, like average and ceiling outcome prediction, comparisons. And most times I don't actually follow through with that, but this one I did. The floor is a former Piston. I think this is like a 0 out of 10. And honestly, it might be a negative 10 out of 10. Worst case scenario, he just forgets how to play basketball. And that's Trey Lyles, with all due respect to him. But Trey Lyles just didn't live up to his hype and everything. So and he was kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. Didn't really translate to the NBA. The median outcome is Marcus Morris.
Richard, you just lost all Pistons fans with that one because they hated Trey Lyles this past season. You're giving so much fuel to the Keegan Murray to Detroit haters.
No, and that's the least likely of these 3. The most likely is probably he turns into Marcus Morris without the hatred of Luka Doncic and some other players in the league. And then you just look at, he's a mismatch no matter how you slice it. You can't put him on threes, or threes can't be put on him. I don't think bigs can really be put on him because he'll exploit it. He's just that walking mismatch. And then the best case is Danny Granger. I'm a big fan of Danny Granger, and that's playing into his true forward position. But if you put Danny Granger with health issues aside into today's NBA, I think you'd get a really similar player. Did that make up for the Trey Lyles comparison?
Oh man, that was I actually think Pistons fans warmed up to Trey a little bit as the season went on.
Yeah, because it got him Marvin Bagley.
Well, it got Marvin Bagley, and also Trey did have a streak when he had 5 or 6 games on the span of a few weeks where he was scoring 15 plus points.
He turned into a really solid small ball 5 in the second unit, Omari. Who anticipated that happening? It just for whatever reason, no matter what happened, Pistons fans still didn't like it, I feel like. So I was okay with it. And like I said, then it netted Marvin. So I want to ask him one more thing, Omari, before we move on to Benedict Mathurin. How do you think he fits into the current Pistons roster? Let's say Jeremy Grant doesn't get traded. Omari and I have talked about this. We're going to talk about it more coming up. Can you play him, Saddiq Bey, Jeremy Grant together? Do you like that? Obviously with Cade and then Isaiah Stewart. Or do you think that hey, maybe Jeremy Grant needs to get moved to make room for Keegan Murray?
Look, here's the way I look at it. I'm not huge on the Pistons front court right now. I think he works. Ideally, I would not want Jeremy Grant there because the way I look at it is, I don't know how to say this nicely without now doubling down almost on that Trey Lyles thing and making people hate, hate what's his name, Keegan Murray. I'm about to call him Danny Granger. And this is not like anything particular on Keegan, but just if Jeremy's going to be there, I'm not a fan of his play style in Detroit. I think it's going to make Keegan more desperate to get his buckets and all that. And I think it's going to just make for worse development, worse product. I'd prefer if Jeremy Grant wasn't there. Now in theory, yes, they could coexist. Jeremy Grant plays, you alternate 3-4 with them, and then in theory you have a rim protector or something. But it's hard to say. I ultimately would prefer, if you're drafting Keegan Murray, it should mean that Jeremy Grant is out the door.
We're going to move on to Benedict Mathurin. He's a guy, he's kind of like Keegan in the sense that he's seen us having a high floor. But I think the real appeal with Mathurin is it's very easy to see how his game translates. He was a very, very good shooter at Arizona. He's a plus athlete. He's got good measurables. He really just has all the tools to be an effective 3-and-D guy. Is that basically the pitch for Mathurin, just that he has usable skills and the team that gets him, you don't have to sprint too hard to see how he fits?
Yeah, and honestly, it's a little bit more than 3-and-D. Like, yes, he is 3-and-D. I see Bryce just fist pumping. Yes, he is 3-and-D right now. Like, I think you look at his first 2 years, he's probably just a shooter and a defender. But you look at the growth opportunities for him, he has such a quick first step. And if he gets even just like the tiniest of improvements of a one dribble move to beat defenders, that's not just like a jab step into a straight dribble, I think you got a really high upside of a creator there, at least in terms of a slasher. He doesn't need to be like some mid-range scorer that, you look at the creators on wings that are his size and everything that play defense and shoot. They're superstars. So I don't know. But for me, it's like you look at if he had the jab step, could hit guys with a stop and pop, I think that would do a lot of work for him. So I like his potential more than a 3-and-D, but as a two-way wing that can just score.
Let's just stay with the 3-and-D because the shooting definitely jumps off the screen, at least to me. He does have like a low dip, but he jumps so high. And that's where I'm talking about, like, I asked earlier about Shaedon Sharpe with the practical athleticism. So with Benedict Mathurin, I think one reason why I'm excited about him, and he's become like one of my guys, quote unquote, like you start doing this NBA draft scouting stuff and you just fall in love with some guys. And I see a high chance of him being like a movement shooter and off the dribble shooter. Do you see those things as well, just because of kind of the fluid athlete that he is?
Yeah, I think you're getting a lot of those movement shooting abilities are really going to surprise people. I don't think we got to see a lot of it at Arizona. And I think ultimately there's going to be some stuff that surprises him even more, like with off the dribble shooting. Like, yes, he really wasn't that good at it. Like his off the dribble shooting, if you watch what they were in the stats, it was like pump fake, dribble, shoot. It's not like a real off the dribble shot. So developing that would be really big. But in terms of just how he's going to shoot, he's going to surprise a lot of people, I think, in just how effective he is right away.
Kind of touched on it earlier, but just the potential he showed in the other areas of his game. How do you feel about the chances he does become more of an on-ball guy as his career progresses? I mean, he very clearly has the 3-and-D archetype now, but do you think he could eventually go from maybe Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is a guy he's compared to? Do you think eventually he'll become a guy where he can do some of that secondary initiating and you feel good when the ball's in his hands and he's initiating things?
Yeah, I think you can trust him there. The USC game where he had, I think, 5 assists or something was the game. If you're looking for a flash, that's the one. He was able to run some pick and roll, run some skip passes by. He was just really impressive. I thought his decision-making was at his best. The decision-making is really, I think, the biggest thing that holds him back right now is he can run these pick and rolls, put himself in the spot, and then push comes to shove. He has to make a decision. Do I go to the corner? Do I go to the roller? Or do I skip? And he just doesn't know how to decide between the three. So I think once he polishes that, you see a huge element of his playmaking unlocked.
I want to ask about his defense because that's another thing I fell in love with, Richard. And I see some people question it. They're not as excited about it. And I'll give you this. Off the ball, it's not always great. He gets a little ball watchy. He loses shooters at times, which that's a little scary with Cade because that's actually one thing that I feel Cade does too much, even in his rookie year in the NBA. But I thought on the ball, he was really good. I just thought there was some possessions where he completely disrupted stuff. I watched the Tennessee game and the breakdown I did, and there was 2 possessions, one in each half, where he single-handedly disrupted the possession on ball. Do you see those type of things, or am I like, and I'm going a little crazy here?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there are lapses. Those scare me. But you look at the upside of what he could do. And I think also in the NBA, it's a little bit easier knowing that this is the real deal. You can't make as many mistakes and be as careless. Like in college, if someone runs off the screen and they're open, half the time they'll get in triple threat and be like, all right, what now? So you can't get away with that like you can in college. And I think that might help him a lot. But ultimately, I think he can cover multiple positions. You look at him being able to guard some fours. He's strong. And also just the way the NBA is, fours aren't the same as they were even like 8 years ago. And to me, that's going to be a big help to him. He can guard just both wings and forward slots really well. I think with him, the defensive upside is legit.
Is there anything with Mathurin that gives you pause? Because personally, and I'm sure Bryce kind of feels the same way, he doesn't seem like he really has a lot of obvious warts. Like there's things he needs to tighten up and improve on, but he seems like a guy who could potentially come in and be pretty effective even from his rookie season.
I have cons listed on him as to what he can improve. He has a loose handle. But and needs to be more consistent. Passing is a little bit weird, perimeter creation. But none of these are like, oh my God, if he doesn't do this, he's toast. My worst case scenario, I do a best case, median, and worst case scenario. My worst case for him is it's almost like I wrote, it's almost impossible. He's unplayable on the floor. At any point, his worst case really comes down to, he's a streaky shooter that plays a little bit of defense and has great athleticism and size. So you're still a rotation player at the very worst.
What, do you have the other two for us as well?
Yeah, so the ideal role is just a two-way wing that can score pretty much anywhere. The best case scenario is a really fun one, I think. If his playmaking develops, whether it's the passing or just the ball handling as a shot creator, so whether pick and roll ball handler or just a pure create his own bucket, his scoring and defense should be pretty high floor. And then he just adds just scoring elements to get up to almost 20 points a game while playing good defense. I mean, that's a real star in this league. That's an all-star outcome.
Do you think that that's the best fit for Cade Cunningham? Because I think that's another reason why I've kind of fell in love with Benedict Mathurin is he kind of fits both things I want to see in a guy next to Cade. Is not a guy that just gets a bucket, but maybe is a little bit of a liability on defense, but not just a lockdown defender who can knock down corner threes. To me, Benedict has the ability to kind of be both, right? He can take the primary guy on defense, but he can also score maybe 20 a game in his prime and even do some secondary ball handling again in his prime.
The Pistons, I don't think it's much of a secret. Cade Cunningham probably, if they could have had anybody in the lottery, it's safe to say he probably wanted Jabari Smith, a guy who elite 3-point shooter, elite defender. That's probably what he wanted. You get a toned down version almost of Jabari Smith right now in Benedict Mathurin with another chance to improve handles, things like that, consistency. And, it's a good consolation prize, I think. You look at what he needs as a secondary help guy and, maybe he evolves in that same role. He's not the same player as this player by any means, but Cade's Klay Thompson role guy could be Benedict Mathurin. And obviously, again, not the shooter or defender that Klay is, but just that mold or role.
Yeah, just where do you see Mathurin's tier being? Is he sort of in that Sharpe? Well, you said you had Sharpe in his own category. I guess for Ivy and Keegan, is he in the same tier guys for you?
He's also, it's for me, I have the top four are pretty much one tier. Then there's the space. There's Mathurin, space. Next tier is Sharpe, and then it goes to Murray, Griffin, and the likes. So Mathurin, I actually have him my number 5 player because you look at the combination of high floor, insanely high floor, and just one of the most useful skills at one of the most useful positions. There's no way he doesn't just be. I'd be shocked if there's after his first contract, he gets anything under 15 to 20 million.
I want to ask one question before we go to segment 3 and get into some second round picks and a little bit other conversation around the draft. A lot of Pistons fans were devastated last Tuesday, Richard, whenever the Pistons fell from 3 to 5. How big of a disappointment is that in this draft? You just went through your tiers. So maybe for you, it's legit, man, that was really bad because you had a chance at a star and now they're not going to have a chance at a star. Or as to the fan base, can they still feel good about where the Pistons are selecting and the prospects that could be available?
The way I look at it is the best player in this draft, it wouldn't shock me if it's somebody not in the top 3 or 4. I guess in this case, we talked about, how important the big 4 is. You still get somebody good. The gap really starts. You don't want to be, if you were a team that got jumped, thankfully it didn't happen this year. I think after 9 is pretty where I see a drop off. Washington's in a tough spot. You would not want to be them. If you're in that top 7 or 8, you're pretty okay for the most part. I think you're looking at a situation where you can still get your guy. I think after the Jabaris, the Chets, and the Palas, it's almost interchangeable. I mean, Ivy, I guess, too, but some teams are going to have Sharpe at 5, some are 9, some at 1, and that goes along the way pretty much after Ivy. I think the Pistons are in good hands still.
We're going to take one more short break here. Then when we come back, we're actually going to talk some second-round prospects with Richard. We're going to put him on the spot, have him make both selections at number 5 and number 46 for the Pistons, and some other NBA draft conversation.
All right, hey, Carlos, just a quick idea. How about if I say, hey, this is Shawn Windsor, and you say, hey, this is Carlos Morales, and I'll go, and then we'll go back. You want to try that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Hey, this is Shawn Windsor.
And this is Carlos Benares.
And we are the team behind Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn, where we are going to talk about, you guessed it, sports, but lots of other stuff. Like what, Carlos?
Oh, we're going to talk about your favorite subject, Shawn, food. Probably more food. Arts, culture, sports, TV, movies, you name it. If it's happened in Detroit, we're going to talk about it.
And sometimes we're going to have guests in who obviously know a lot more than we do about just about everything. But we're going to have some free press journalists to talk about big stories, folks from the sports world. We're going to be out every Thursday. You can find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We hope you'll join us.
All right, Omari, we got a new comment here on Apple Podcasts from Akeem32. He said, great chemistry between you guys, easy to listen to, get straight to the point and entertaining. I drive trucks for a living and I look forward to you guys. I just wish y'all had more content. One show a week, ? Come on, man. Y'all keep working. Big fan here. Omari, that one made me laugh. It made me smile. I think it's good when the fan base wants more episodes and not less.
Yeah, we've had a couple people say that. Unfortunately, I think we're just locked into one pod a week for the time being. These take a little bit more work than fans might expect. But hey, we're really in a good groove right now, and we definitely appreciate the listenership and support.
Absolutely. Make sure if you want to support the podcast, you give us a rating, a review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the podcast. We appreciate all of that engagement. So email us, hit us up on Twitter. But Richard, let's get you back in here. And the Pistons do have another pick in this draft at number 46. So let's just talk second round prospects. And we can kind of try to say, I know this is hard, Richard, like at 46, who's going to be there, who's not. You know, we got Troy Weaver, so maybe we end up with 3 second round picks. You never know what Troy's going to do. Can you give the listeners some names, some guys you like? And we could even go down the path of names you don't like.
I'll start with 4 guys that really jump out. For me, it starts with Trevor Keels from Duke. I don't know what his stock is. And the reason I say that, I actually have him as a top 35 player, but there's guys that I don't have in my top 35 that are going to go above him. I just have accepted that I'm not super high on. So ultimately, he's one. He's a bulldog of a guard. Needs to improve shooting consistency, but I think there's reason to believe he will. Alondes Williams from Wake Forest. He's a combo guard. Probably he has a really good case for best passer in the draft. Great athlete, needs to be more consistent from 3. Amari, you'll like this. Max Christie from Michigan State, 3-and-D upside with some ball handling ability too. And then if you want another shooter, Ron Harper Jr. from Rutgers is another guy I really like. So those are 4 names I would be pretty happy with the Pistons on getting.
Let's talk about Max Christie. Of course, he didn't have a great freshman season at Michigan State. Kind of came in for a reputation as a shooter, and I think he only shot around 31%. But you just look at the size of his wingspan. He's about 6'5". Like he's got a good wingspan, pretty solid athleticism. Is he more, like, you see him as more of a developmental guy? He comes into a program and then maybe 2-3 years he begins to kind of show that potential that led to him being a 5-star.
You look at a guy with 3-and-D upside. I think he's probably the truest 3-and-D upside guard at this range, or wing, I should say, because he had some crazy tough defensive moments. I think the numbers really underestimate him. He shot from 3, it was only 32%, but that 82% from the free throw line, I think, indicates that shooting upside is very real. How quick it's real, hard to say, but I think if a team can be patient and say, hey, year 1, we know we're not going to get a lot from him, but year 2, we can see that the shooting and the defense will come along, you get a rotation player right away after that.
And do you support his decision to stay in? Do you think at this point he's probably going to end up in a spot where he gets drafted?
Yeah, he's going to get drafted. I think he should. Ultimately, he's probably not going to go in the first round, but there's only 30 slots. So if your logic is, hey, if you're not a first round pick, you shouldn't come out early, then the draft's going to be 50 people. I support him. I think he can latch on in the right spot.
For sure. Yeah, I talked to him about the combine last week, and Peter said he felt like it was the right time, and he's not as concerned about where he gets drafted, more so just getting in the right position where a team can be patient and develop him. So we saw the Spurs with Josh Primo last year, and they took him a lot higher than I think anybody expected. But we're seeing teams just feel comfortable doing that now. You have the two-way situation where you can sign guys on two-way contracts, bust them between the G League team and then get reps with the actual team as well. And Max Christie, I think he makes sense. Maybe he's good enough to where he gets drafted and he's not, going to be a two-way undrafted guy. But but I agree with everything you said. I think Max Christie would be a good pickup for the Pistons at 46.
Earlier, Richard, we talked about the 2020 draft, and there may have been a miss from the Pistons there at the top of that draft. And that was Killian Hayes, obviously, a guy who kind of ran the second unit here at the end of this past season. And I don't know if the Pistons will try him back in the starting lineup or not. Maybe it depends on who they draft with that number 5 pick. You brought up Trevor Keels and Alondas Williams, and I couldn't help but go immediately to this. Are those guys, is one of those guys like a replacement for a Killian Hayes? Can they play with Killian Hayes? I know a little bit more about Keels. I actually think him and Hayes, the shooting would be a question, but those guys would get after you defensively. Alondas Williams more of like a true point guard? Because I hear about his passing all the time.
I don't think Alondas is a true point guard. Okay. I think he's a combo guard that can pass really well, if that makes sense. But with Killian and Trevor Keels, you got to have the right shooters out there. You got to find a stretch 5, give to Sadiq Bey at the 4, and Cade probably at the 3. I don't know about that. I'd probably prefer Trevor Keels to be on when Hayes is off and vice versa.
Let's move on, and we're going to have you make selections for the Pistons at 5 and 46. So let's say the Pistons can pick between, let's say the Kings go with Jaden Ivey, which I don't know if they will because he kind of overlaps with De'Aaron Fox a little bit, but just because you're higher on him and he's off of the draft board. So you have Shaedon, Sharpe, Mathurin, Keegan Murray. Actually, let's just say Murray's there too, but between those 4, who do you think the Pistons should pick?
Swing for the fences. It's not the best draft. Find the highest upside. It's probably him. If you miss one, no matter even if you hit or miss long term, it doesn't impact this year that much. You could tank again and get Wembanyama. And just in general, if you miss next year on Wemby, like you got a really strong class. Go ahead, go for the upside. You missed in 2020. You kind of need to make up for it by finding an equally opposite ceiling. And I'm good with Shaedon Sharpe there. I think the unknown, I really think 5 is probably his real landing spot too.
Okay, so what about number 46, Richard? So you take Shaedon Sharpe at number 5. Not that really impacts 46, but who do you take at 40? Like, I feel like you're just going to go right down Amari's lane right here. You took Shaedon Sharpe, who he took in his article for free. Make sure you guys go read that article. Always read Amari Sankofa II. And then I have a feeling, because you're seeing the sweater he's wearing right now, where you're going to go with number 46.
Well, we're about to find out just how much of a suck-up I am, because I've been trying to debate in my head. I'm like, do I go for the crowd pleaser? Like, what do I do here? And it would be on brand, because doesn't Detroit like drafting local guys? Like, hasn't that been a thing with Troy Weaver? Let's break character here. I'm going to say they take Alondas Williams because they buy them that they can fix his jump shooting. You look at a guy who's 23 years old, I believe 22, 23, is a little bit older, ready to contribute now. Can bring defense, can pass, and they buy the jump shot coming along.
All right, so there's been some talk. You talked earlier, right, about Jeremy Grant and the possibility of the trade, or I talked about it. You talked about moving him if they drafted Keegan Murray. Let's just say in a world that the Pistons are able to trade Jeremy Grant for number 7. I don't want to ask who they take at 7. I want to ask this because this was going around Twitter. Would you package 5 and 7 to move into the top 3? Let's just say somebody was willing. Let's say Presti doesn't think he has enough draft picks and he's willing to move off number 2. Would you package 5 and 7 to go up to number 2? Is there enough of a difference there?
Yeah, I would. You don't have to worry about the worst case scenarios in those guys for the most part. Like, yeah, Chet might get injured, but like so could Mathurin, so could Murray, so could Sharpe. We don't know anything about Sharpe's medical history. Actually, like I'd almost be more alarmed about him. We don't know a thing. So there's an entire chance that if injury is your fear with any of these guys, just stay out of the draft. Don't draft anybody because you know what? Anybody at any time can get hurt. It's basketball. Like it's the same thing. Like why would you draft somebody if you're so scared of the injury? Like you're playing to lose at that point. So for me, you look at the upsides of these guys and the elite floors they all offer, get in the top 3.
I want to pick your brain about a prospect that I think I may be a little bit higher on than some other people. And some folks got mad at me on Twitter because I think they read my tweet as the Pistons should draft this person at 5, which is not what I was saying. I was just saying I think maybe he's closer to that range than a lot of people think. But Johnny Davis.
Your takes have been a little rough lately, Omar. I mean, between the Batman and Chicago-style pizza. So you can't blame the Twitter followers, right?
Well, in this case, like, just if you read the tweet, I never said the Pistons should take Johnny Davis at 5. It was if the Pistons. I tweeted that the Pistons talked to Johnny Davis, and everybody's like, "Oh no!" Like everybody freaks out because God forbid a team talk to a guy, right? And and then somebody was like, "If Troy Weaver takes Johnny Davis, I'll fight him." And I was just like, "Johnny Davis can hoop." I'm not saying like take him at 5, but this guy can like play, but just him as a prospect, right? So he's 6'5", he's got good measurables, he's a solid athlete, elite rebounder, potentially the best wing defender in the draft, gets to the line. And there's also, he shoots pretty well, he's got the mid-range game, so maybe the three-point shot comes around in the NBA. Where are you on Johnny Davis as a prospect? And is there a case that he should be in that tier along with Ivey and Sharpe, Mathurin, those guys?
Yeah, I don't think he's in that conversation personally. I have him at the back end of my top of the lottery pretty much. I have him at the 11 spot. You look at what he can do, and it's just really special. Like, he was a one-man show at Wisconsin, so we got to see more of him, I think, in a lot of ways, which was good and bad. But I think you look at a situation where if he had Cade Cunningham next to him, or like someone, just that lead ball handler next to him that was just really special and an NBA caliber player, he would have been a lot better. Wisconsin would have been a lot better. So you look at the defense, you touched on that. He tries every single play. There's no play he takes off. And when you're the number one option on a team doing everything on offense while contributing, being the leader on defense, that's a really tough task to take. So I like that. My issue with him is he too predictable? Will that hurt him in the NBA? I mean, you look at how he uses screens, and I feel like I can tell you every single time what he's going to do. It's not very deceptive. He does a jab step right, it's always going to go left, like that kind of thing. And I don't know, can that be figured out? If he uses a screen, he's always going to shoot behind it. It feels like he doesn't like going around and manipulating, using the screen after the initial burst. So things like that do scare me. But if he's put in the right role, and I think next to Cade you would see it, he becomes like an off-ball primary player where he catches and drives. That's probably his absolute strength. Just doing spot-up attacks is probably how you play to his strengths, and I think he'd be good in Detroit. I wouldn't take him at 5, obviously, but if they wanted to trade back, he's not a bad alternative.
Would you take him at 7 or 8? Let's say, they made one of those trades.
I'd prefer if they still got one of the guys that we talked about this episode, but if Troy's a little bit higher on Johnny than the others, I get it. It's not the worst thing. It's just not ideal.
All right, I want to have a little fun here before we go, and I haven't even told Amari this, so I hope he doesn't get mad at me and leave the podcast. But I'm going to put both of you in this. We're going to rank the prospects from the last 2 classes. All right, Omari, you game for that?
I'm game.
You can see the list there on the outline towards the bottom. So last year's class, we're going to take the top 5 picks: Cade, Mobley, Green, Suggs, and Barnes. We're going to take what is mostly the consensus from this class: JSJ, Chet, Paolo, Ivey, and Sharpe. Who would you have number 1, Richard, as prospects, obviously?
I think I just almost everyone from 2021 outside of Scotty Barnes. Like, I'm not going to adjust Jalen Suggs. He had a terrible season. But pre-draft, I mean, I had him my number 3 player. I think the top 4 would all be the top 4. Like from last year, those same 4 in order. I had Cade, Mobley. Obviously, I wasn't 100% right on this, but then I had Jalen Suggs. And then out of those next ones, I had Jalen Green as my next. And I would take those 4 very safely over anybody in this draft. And then it goes probably Jabari or Chet and then Paolo and then Scotty Barnes.
Okay, so Scotty Barnes would go after
Cade Mobley. And all this is not
from this class, 1, 2.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, Jabari and Chet.
And so you'd go Jabari, Chet, then Barnes before you got to Paolo, Ivey, and Sharpe?
I'd probably put Paolo right in front too. And this is all not knowing what we know now.
100%.
Just to clarify. Obviously that answer changes otherwise. But yeah, that's I would put the top 3 in this draft before Ivey ahead of Scotty Barnes.
And so you were pretty high on, are you still high on Suggs in terms of, like, I know he had maybe not the same rookie season these other guys had, but...
Yeah, you talk to a lot of stat heads and they will say he's not overcoming the odds. It's almost impossible. I'm not too worried. Stuff's fixable. Shot didn't fall. Process over results is how I'm looking at it.
All right, Omari, what about you? Do we need to go back and forth, or did you have 3 guys from that last year's class? Where are you at?
No, I mean, I think I'm pretty similar. I would probably go Cade, Mobley, Green, in that order, being the top 3 prospects, considering both classes. And honestly, I'm tempted to even put Mobley above Cade a little bit, just because it's really, really, really hard to get guys like Evan Mobley. It's still a bit easier to get Cade, not to sell Cade short, he's a deserving number 1. But I mean, big men like Mobley come around once every, 6 or 7 years, if that. So I think I kind of lean toward him because of that, just the scarcity argument. I wasn't quite as high on Suggs. My thing with Suggs, I think he'll be an above average point guard, but I think it's easiest to get a good point guard in the NBA relative to other positions. You look at most drafts, you can usually get a good point guard if you have a top 20 pick. And also Suggs is not being a great shooter, kind of bumped it down a little bit for me. So I think I would go Cade/Mobley, Green, and then I would go Jabari Smith and Chet. Those guys are kind of the same tier too. I'd lean toward Chet, same argument as Mobley. It's just really hard to get guys like that. And then I would probably go Suggs. And then Banchero. I'm sorry, I would actually go Banchero over Suggs. I'm looking at it now. I'm probably a little bit lower on Suggs than that. Banchero, and then Suggs, and then Scotty, and then Ivy and Sharpe. And Sharpe probably has the potential to kind of leap into that higher tier, but just from having not seen him play, it's kind of hard to put that much stock into it.
So I feel like both of you are somewhat similar. You're putting the top 3 guys, top 4 guys ahead of even the number 1 guy in this year's class. Is that kind of how you feel about this class in general, Richard? That kind of stays on brand? I know it's been tagged as a little bit of a weaker class type of stuff. Not saying that any of these guys won't be stars or game changers. Most likely somebody will, but that kind of is on brand with how this class has been labeled.
Yeah, it's a I don't want to say mediocre. It's an above average draft. The reason I say that is the role players are very good, similar to 2020, but with less star power at the top. I have a hard time seeing a true top 10 player coming out of this draft, unless there's 2 guys that would do it. And to me, it's Paolo and Chet, maybe Jaden Ivey. It's tough. When there's not a superstar, your ceiling of a draft does get held down pretty hard. I mean, there's a reason everybody asks how many people draft is it kind of thing. Is it a 3-person draft, 4-person, 1, whatever it is, and that makes a weak draft. So the role players that can be had from this draft is strong. The depth is strong, but is the star power strong? No.
All right, Richard, we got to get you out of here because you're headed to Game 3. We're recording this Sunday afternoon, evening, so you're headed to Game 3 of Mavs and Warriors. But before you go, and thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you so much. But give us your predictions on Game 3. This will drop on Tuesday, so give us your predictions on Game 3, this series, the Eastern Conference Series, and through the finals. You're a Mavericks fan. I know this is tough, but what do you got for us?
I don't think I've been asked this so many times every podcast I do, and I don't think I've gotten it right. So I'm going to just keep going with the same thing. This series is over in 4 or 5. Those third quarters, I think the third quarter Warriors is the most dominant stretch of basketball in a game that any team over the last 10 years has been able to put on consistently. They just, under Steve Kerr, they've always come out. And even if you play your A game, they play an A+ game and they beat you. And I think the Mavs are overmatched. It's not anything that the Mavs could really do. You look at what they did in Game 2, it hurts. Still even just thinking about that game. But I'm happy to be wrong, but they're playing with house money. Not too worried. Out of the East, I think Miami takes it. I think they're taking it in 6 or 7. I don't think it's going to be a very easy series by any means, but I think ultimately the Warriors will beat the Heat if that happens. And the Warriors, they get their next ring. I mean, they're really good right now. They're rolling. They found their rhythm.
Richard, thank you so much for joining us. Give everybody a chance again to find you, your Twitter, your website, everything you're doing, because you're big time and a go-to guy for NBA draft content.
Hey, I appreciate it. Mavs Draft on Twitter is pretty much the hub. Anything I do, I post through there, but I'll be doing scouting reports, Bryce's film reviews. I'm posting those that he puts on YouTube to the site. Really tackles we should have, I was telling Bryce this, there's a real chance we get everybody in the top 100 between us two whether it's a film breakdown scouting report or a written scouting report, we'll get every single player from the top 100 done.
I can't thank you enough for giving me that opportunity to do some of that stuff, which I really enjoy. Thank you again. Omari, I'm going to let you close it out here. As you close it out, can you give us your finals prediction, my man?
I can't bet against Golden State. They're up 2-0. And I mean, this Boston-Miami series has been so seesaw. It's tough to predict how that one would go. But I'm not betting against a healthy Golden State. So I'm just going to go Golden State over Boston.
I got the Warriors as well.
Big thanks to everybody who else produced the pod. Our editor, Carrie Zier II, our executive producer, Antoinette Delgado, and also our executive producer, Kirkland Crawford. Also, shout out to Wes, the man who keeps us in line and puts our outlines together. I could not do the pod without him. We'll have more draft talk for you all next week. Talk to you soon.